The Biden administration recently announced the plan to release 1 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to lower gas prices this summer. But will it actually work? Guess what I see here? That kicks off our second episode of
Beware, Numbers in Isolation.
Before we proceed, let's test your knowledge. How much do you really know about gas use in America? The White House is releasing 1 million barrels of oil, but how does that compare to our actual oil use? In the given week, does the US use more or less than 1 million barrels of oil for gas? Now here's the challenge for you. Guess the number of barrels of oil used per week in the US for gasoline. Take a minute, write down your estimate. I'll wait. Seriously, write it down. Here's a picture of a cat. Specifically, this is our big boy, Stringer. We're not moving on until you write down your answer. Got it? Good. So what number did you write? The actual answer of how many barrels of oil that are used in the US per week is 130 million barrels. Were you anywhere close to that? Before we get back to our main story on gas prices, let's delve into a fascinating concept that I use to influence your guess. It's called anchoring. I started talking about 1 million barrels of oil. That's a big number. Since that's the planned release by the White House, my guess is, regardless of your initial reaction, this shifted your thinking that 1 million must be significant. This is an example of the behavioral economics concept of anchoring. Thinking of a number first, our brains get primed before we make our guess. Just having that number in our minds will impact our estimate. The number doesn't even have to be related. There's a number of studies asking students to first write down the last 2 digits of their social security number and then guess the price of a bottle of wine. Based on whether their social security number ends with a higher or lower value will actually influence their prediction, with higher numbers estimating higher prices. I'm confident this will set up another episode of this in the future, but I just wanted to share, so as you're confronted with big numbers in isolation, beware that they may be priming your initial guess. Back to the issue of today, let's talk about how much gas is used in the US. When faced with a big number in isolation, it's a good idea to try to get some scale to evaluate that number. A technique that I want to apply is to figure out how big that number is compared to something else. In this case, if it's barrels of oil released to reduce gas prices, let's think about how much gas is actually used in the US to evaluate if this will make any difference at all. One technique to do this without the power of Google is to do some rough market sizing. This is actually a type of question that's used in consulting interviews, and as a nerd, I weirdly enjoy doing stuff like this in my head. So let's think about how many gallons of gas are used per day. Generally, to size a market, you start with a population. Since we want to understand gas use in the US, let's begin by looking at America's population. Next, we'll consider what percentage of people have a car. Then we want to estimate how many miles each of them drives per day. And then lastly, let's think about what's the average gas mileage for a vehicle. We cancel out units, we're going to be left with number of gallons used per day in America. Putting some numbers to this, I'll tell you that the population of the US is about 330 million people. Now, what percent of people have a car? We'll estimate that for every person, there's about 0.8 cars. Now, how far does the average person drive per day? I can estimate between commuting, driving for errands, the occasional road trip. We'll say the average is about 30 miles per car per day. So what's the average gas mileage of a car? I know some cars are going to be better, some big SUVs and trucks are going to be worse, but I'm thinking, say 25 miles per gallon seems pretty reasonable. Doing the math, that tells us that Americans are using 316.8 gallons of gas per day. Back to big numbers in isolation, does that seem reasonable to you? Since I walked you through my logic, do you think the real answer is over or under my estimate? I assure you, I did this before looking up the actual answer. According to the Energy Information Administration, we use around 370 million gallons of gas every day, and that doesn't count another 125 million gallons of diesel. So my market sizing was at least on the right scale, but even with my estimates, I was a little bit low. These are ridiculously large numbers, so it's tough to visualize what that means. Converting this to barrels of oil, we can learn that each barrel of crude generates around 20 gallons of gas. Using the real number, this means that we use around 18.5 million barrels of oil to drive around America per day. Trying to put this on a visual scale, here's a picture of a very large crude carrier tanker ship. This specific ship can hold up to 2.2 million barrels of crude oil. Since that's difficult to picture and we're talking about America, here's a picture of a couple football fields for context. And because this is the internet, here's a banana for scale. The Biden announcement releases 1/2 of one of these ships from the strategic reserve. In America, we go through almost 9 of these ships per day, or over 3,000 of these per year. So what will the impact on gas prices be for releasing 1 million barrels of oil? Honestly, pretty much zero. But it sounds like a good talking point. For Biden supporters, the line is that Biden cares about American families and is doing what he can to bring down oil prices. For critics, I most commonly see that this is an ill-advised use of a precious strategic resource. In reality, the answer is pretty much won't do anything economically. Applying some very rough linear supply and demand math, if we use the 18.5 million barrels of oil per day, and if all of that oil was released at once, which isn't the plan anyway, with gas prices around $3.60 per gallon nationally, dumping 1 million barrels of oil on the market would drop the price to about $3.42 for one day, and then it would immediately rebound back to $3.60 the next day. If released over a week, the price nationally would decrease to about $3.57 and then bounce back. And if this was released over a month, the impact would be less than a penny a gallon. Given that prices at the pump tend to increase during summer months for a variety of reasons, I really don't see this playing out well. If the White House gets lucky and prices do fall, it's due to other external factors. The fact is, oil is a global commodity, and producers are going to work to maximize their profit. Even drilling and producing more domestically will only do so much to impact prices at the pump, as OPEC and other oil-producing nations hold a significant influence over the global market and can increase or lower their supply to impact prices. While politicians like to do things like this to sound good, they're genuinely limited in their ability to influence your road trip fill-up price. It doesn't matter which party's in the White House. I really hope this was helpful and that you learned some things about the impact of anchoring on your estimate, how market sizing can be a quick check on the relevance of a big number, and what to really expect at the pump this summer. When it comes to American oil use, 1 million barrels is just a drop in a very, very large bucket of dinosaur juice. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and again, if you're daring, what were your estimates at the beginning? If you see another big number in isolation, please send it my way. I'd love to break it down and help better understand what's happening and why it's there. If you're traveling this summer, drive safely, keep thinking, and we'll talk again soon.